Hi, my name is Neve Hannon, and I'd like to welcome you here today. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this recording. Um, Today, my focus is on helping people to understand maybe what's going on when they're dealing with a difficult people situation in the workplace. So we want to kind of take a little deeper dive to understanding because a lot of the times we're just reacting to behavior. And I suppose this particular webinar came about because I've been working a lot coaching one-to-one senior leaders. And this is something they all have in common. They don't necessarily come to coaching just because of people issues, but often it takes up a good bit of space and is definitely part of their goals on feeling more confident and more competent and skillful in how do I manage this? How do I deal with this situation? This is taking up so much of my time, so much of my energy, and I need that time and energy for the real work. So it's a really important issue, and pretty much everybody I talk to, regardless of what kind of size company or organization they're working in, share these issues. So, a little bit about my background. If you haven't met me before, I'm a chartered counselling psychologist. I was a therapist for 20 years. I had a private practice in South Dublin here in Ireland, and I closed that down in 2019 after 20 years and retrained in coaching. And so COVID happened, and I set up my business online and have been working with senior leaders since. And I was approached in 23 by Dr. Lola Gershfeld from California, who is the founder, creator, and author of the EMC process. So let me tell you a little bit about that. First of all, EMC stands for emotional connection. And so EMC really is about helping organizations master the art of relationships so that you can spend less time dealing with all those people issues and more time focusing on the real work. What I love about this approach is that there's no finger pointing or scapegoating. There's no bad guy in this approach. This is really about creating emotional safety in the workplace. And it's essentially a step-by-step roadmap, a very structured process that anybody can learn and that I can train you in to help you to give you the skills really to navigate those tricky people issues, and giving you a language really that when you and your team can speak that language, it's like it creates just a solid foundation of safety and trust, and means that you know how to address and you now have the skills to address all those tricky emotions that happen in the workplace, and conflict or discord that often pops its head. So, as I mentioned, this is developed by Dr. Lola Gershfeld and her team, and I'm the first trained to this level and the first to bring it to Europe. So, if you would like to learn more about it, I'll share some more at the end, but emcleaders.com is the American website. So when we look at, difficult behaviors in the workplace, a lot of the time that's stemming from or causing conflict, or both. So 85% of employees at all levels experience some degree of conflict, and 1 in 4 have reported avoidance of conflict resulted in either their sickness from like stress, literally, or their absenteeism from work. So they're avoiding dealing with that person, bumping into them or whatever it might be, and so they're staying out of work. So that's a huge cost in and of itself, and has a lot of impacts on the team and productivity, as well as just people losing sleep and being really stressed. So when we talk about conflict in this approach, I prefer to use the word disconnect, because often when we use the word conflict, we think of something that's quite explicit and outright and often quite escalated. And yet, an awful lot of the time in the workplace, because we try to keep a lid on things and try to keep up that professional veneer, conflict is happening more under the surface. It's in passive aggressive behavior, it's in favoritism, or isolating people or excluding people or speaking badly, bitching about people. So there's, or maybe distrust. So it's like, okay, I can work with you and I'll keep up that professional veneer, but I don't like you and I don't trust you. So that all speaks to a disconnect. There's a disconnection in the relationship, even though you may not recognize it as outright conflict. So we're talking really about that broader sense of disconnect. And when we look at that, the research would indicate that in 2008, the average employee spent 3 hours per person per week dealing with conflict. That's a lot. And it has grown. In 2022, when that was remeasured, it had grown to 4.2 hours per week. So if you make that out for your team and your organization, what that looks like essentially is 4.2 hours per person per week. If you have even 10 people in your team, that's 42 hours per week. That's the equivalent of a full-time position. Now multiply that out over the year and bring in the average salary in your workplace, and you can start to see, and multiply that out then by the number of people, and the costs are huge. So it's not just a monetary cost though. There's a very much an emotional cost in this, a health cost, a well-being cost, a team cost, a productivity and performance. We cannot work at our best when this is happening. And sorry, just to go back on that, we know that, like, even back in 2008, there were a lot of approaches available to dealing with this. And even with all the leadership development and the culture work that has been done and money invested in that, this problem has still grown, which is why we think it needs a new approach. And we're bringing that approach by looking at emotions in the workplace in a safe way. So we know also that 3/4 of people who leave their job do so because of their boss. And this Harvard Business Review survey showed that 75% of survey participants said that the most stressful aspect of their job was the relationship with their immediate boss. So this starts to give us a clue as to where we're going here. If you're seeing difficult behavior, bad behavior, unacceptable behavior sometimes in the workplace, that's a clue that there's a disconnect in a key relationship there straight away. Okay. Because the stress that we experience in the workplace, a huge amount of the time has to do with the person that we directly report into, or the people that we're meant to collaborate most closely with, our closest colleagues and our boss. And for the manager, of course, it's their team. Can they rely on them? Are they performing? Are they making me look good, or are they making me look bad? So they need a key relationship. That they're also key relationships. And so when we look at, if you start on the left-hand column here, and the drivers of life satisfaction, job satisfaction contributes to about 25% of our overall life satisfaction. So it's a pretty decent chunk, not as big as mental health, which is 36, and there are other variables there as well. But if we break down that 25% job satisfaction and look at, well, what are the drivers of that? 39% of that is down to interpersonal relationships. So the single biggest factor in our job satisfaction is our relationships. It's more important than how much money we earn, or whether we've got a nice ladder to climb, good prospects in this job, or even whether we find it to be an interesting job. What's most important is the relationships. So, and we know this anecdotally too, that people will stay in a crappy job if they like the people. They could stay there for years. And vice versa also happens. It doesn't matter how much you're getting paid or how good the job prospects are. If you don't like the people, if you cannot connect, if you don't feel safe, then you'll be gone. You won't stay. Okay. So that's real experience backed up by the science there. And when we look at those interpersonal relationships in that middle column and break that down further, 86% of that is down to the relationships we have with the person that we report to, the relationships with management, our immediate boss. So that's an absolutely critical factor in our job satisfaction and in engagement levels. And we know that engagement levels have been notoriously low across the board globally. People are checking, clocking in, clocking out, not engaged, not working to their best, which indicates that there's something going wrong in our relationships in the workplace. And we need to start taking that seriously and really looking at that. So, the root cause of workplace conflict and the difficult behavior we're seeing is the loss of connection between co-workers or direct report manager relationship. And this goes back to attachment theory, really. We are social bonding creatures as humans. We need connection in order to survive. We need to be part of the tribe. And in order for us to thrive and really perform, we need those solid connections to be in place. We need to feel safe. And this is backed up by more modern neuroscience as well. So recent research has indicated that that there are huge consequences to our growing sense of isolation and loss of social connection. So funnily enough, even though we're more connected than ever before with our phones, we're also more disconnected than ever before. And that's having an impact on rising levels of anxiety and depression. And again, just that sense of feeling disconnected, not knowing our neighbors, not having somebody to rely on, not necessarily feeling safe at work with the people that we work with. So more and more people are experiencing isolation. Loneliness is at an epidemic level. We're disconnected, and that leads to disengagement and stress, which in turn can create poor behavior in the workplace. Okay, so people are, showing up, but not at their best in any way. And often then there's a whole cycle that ensues. So if we take a moment to understand what's happening in the brain. So, excuse me, the emotion part of our brain is called the amygdala. It's an old part of our brain, really, and it goes back to that kind of fight or flight survival mode that it's there since then. And so the amygdala, when we are emotionally aroused, that the amygdala is firing up. Okay, so if we're, going into like stress or overwhelm or anxiety or fear, then that's our amygdala firing off. The thing about the amygdala is that it has the power to override pretty much any other part of the brain. It has a lot of different connections there, including the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex at the front of your head really is the part of your brain that's responsible for executive functioning. So it's impulse control as well. It's the logical, rational reasoning part of your brain. It's the part that isn't, it's the last part of the brain to develop. So it's not fully grown until we're about 24 years old. So this is why if you have teenagers, they may be impulsive, they don't see things further down the line. It's just all about the now. They literally don't have that part of their brain fully developed yet. So it's not their fault. They just can't think that way yet. But for all of us, if we come back to the relevance of what's important here is that the amygdala has the power to override the prefrontal cortex, but the prefrontal cortex does not have the power to override the amygdala. So what that means is that when we are in that emotionally firing off aroused state, our amygdala is in the driving seat. And the prefrontal cortex, the logical, rational thinking brain, has to take a back seat. It doesn't have a choice. So if somebody's really angry or really anxious, you trying to reason with them is not helping because you're not talking to that part of the brain. You're talking to the amygdala at that point. And so we have to find ways to calm the amygdala down before the prefrontal cortex can jump into the driving seat. And then you can reason and rationalize with somebody and make sense and get sense out of them. But when they're in that alert or alarmed state, talking just goes out the window. Okay, you're not engaging with their prefrontal cortex. Okay, so I hope that makes some sense. And so what happens then in the workplace is that the amygdala is being triggered and firing off, and then people's logical, rational thinking brain that we like to think we use for our workday doesn't have a look in, and so that's impacting our behavior. We're often behaving or acting in ways that are not very logical and in ways that we're not necessarily proud of then later in the day when we have calmed down and we can reflect. So it makes it hard for us to control our emotions in that sense. But our thoughts cannot control our emotions, but our emotions can control. They dominate the brain. Okay. So hopefully that makes some sense to you and you can understand that. Feel free to send questions on to me. I'll let you know how you can get in touch at the end. So I'm just going to share a video of Elena, a short little video. Elena was a director in this organization, and she had experienced a disconnect in her relationship with somebody who was reporting directly into her. And because of that difficulty, this person really missed out on a promotion. And Elena felt like she was failing as this person's manager. So we'll let Elena tell you, this is before they had the NEMC intervention.
I had been a manager for a while, but I could sense that I was struggling personally with at least one of my reports very clearly. Because there was nothing like major, but there were like little things that would come up here and there, and that it would just make our day-to-day harder than maybe it should have been. There was sometimes a lot of like complaining and whining about like small things that I couldn't understand why, that really triggered me in a way and like drove me crazy and actually made me want to interact with this person less, right? I would feel inadequate or not good enough, or I'm not being a good manager because I'm not able to support her. So then my reaction was to just put distance and shut down. And that also triggered her because she felt I was not caring enough. And then obviously she was trying even harder, but her way of trying was complaining, which endless negative loop, like you just keep on this dynamic. I mean, I did feel very, very lonely at times and sad. Honestly, if I have to boil it down to the very basics, I was just sad. Absolutely. I mean, I felt I was failing as a manager, right? Because here I have someone that apparently is capable, smart, good, and I'm unable to provide her the guidance and the support to keep growing. Instead of that, it seems that she's actually almost regressing instead of going forward. So as a manager, it's an awful feeling to have. It's painful. It's not easy. I don't think, anyone enjoys that.
So you can hear from Elena how she experienced the relationship disconnect and the difficulty she had with that. And obviously it impacted on both of them. So Elena there talks about being stuck in a negative cycle, a loop of negativity, really. So what we're seeing there is that each person is triggering and re-triggering the other, and then that just deepens that negative cycle. Excuse me. So when we feel excluded or isolated, or we experience that kind of breakdown in a relationship, any kind of little rupture, and I want to really amplify the fact here that it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be big conflicts, it doesn't have to be a big disagreement. Something as simple as a look or a tone of voice can trigger this reaction in us, okay? We're wired to pick up on those little signs, those little pieces of body language in fractions of a second. And so even though we're not conscious of processing this, our eyesight, our hearing is picking up at these things. Our brain is processing that, interpreting it, and sending signals. And so we can get caught up in a cycle very quickly. And so these kind of experiences in the environment, whether it's, seeing, picking up or perceiving our manager to be disappointed or dismissive or cross or whatever, that can trigger a kind of panic response in the brain. And that we call a separation distress, because it's disrupting the safety of our attachment bond with that person at that moment. And so that panic response or distress really sets off a whole cycle and it impacts on our behavior. And it leads some people to become more demanding, more judgmental, more critical, which is how Elena perceived or experienced her direct report. She felt like she was just always complaining, always finding fault, um, and actually these people are what we call pursuers. So the other type of person then, or the other type of reaction, is some people instead withdraw, disengage, and start to avoid, and so they're more naturally withdrawers. Okay, and I think of them a little bit like Pac-Man. The pursuer is in hot pursuit, the withdrawer is running away. So when the pursuer, somebody who's naturally a pursuer, if they sense that, I'm trying to fix this here, there's a problem. So they're sensing that something is wrong and they want to address it. It's like we need to talk. We need to figure this out. The person who's more naturally withdrawer, as they sense the pursuer pursuing, they're starting to move away. They're starting to disengage. They're starting to shut down because they're going into overwhelm. And they're like, I can't cope with this. I need to shut this down. And so they're legging it out of there. As the pursuer senses the withdrawal happening, they're going hotter into pursuit because it's like, well, we can't fix this if you're gone. So I need to pull you back. I need to get you back. Come back. As the pursuer, or sorry, as the withdrawer senses that pursuit, they're withdrawing harder. So each is triggering the other and it becomes more entrenched. Um, and so that kind of just caused the conflict or the disconnect to perpetuate, really. And then, of course, it often spreads around among co-workers and creates maybe a whole toxic environment. So when we look at a pursuer, and I'm quite naturally a pursuer, what that means to me in the positive is my intention, and this is for pursuers. So the intention of a pursuer is they recognize that there's an issue, they can feel maybe a wall coming up or a distance happening, they can feel the disconnect. And I need to address this. I need to fix this. We need to get back on the same page. So they want to jump in there and fix it. Okay. So usually you'll hear phrases like, we need to talk, or I've sent 10 emails. Why haven't you responded? And even that much can come across as blame, as criticism, as judgment or complaining, or maybe demanding. And so particularly when somebody is in hot pursuit in that way, it can come across as any of these things without you meaning to be this way. But that's how it can come across. And the more desperate the pursuer gets, the more aggressive often that they can come across, and intimidating potentially. Okay. So, and that's fueled by their own fear and anxiety because they're worried about this relationship and that the fact that, my manager isn't listening to me. I can't get them to answer me or to meet with me or whatever it might be, or my direct report. The withdrawer then is somebody who also wants to fix the relationship, but their way of doing that is we need to shut this down. I don't want this to escalate. This is getting out of hand. It's going to explode. I can't cope. I need to get away. Okay. So they're going into kind of such overwhelm that they have to find an escape hatch. And so they disengage, they withdraw, they may start avoiding the pursuer. There may be stonewalling, silent treatment, distancing. And again, in the office, it may be less obvious bad behavior than a pursuer, but it can be very frustrating. For example, if somebody walks out of the room when you walk in, or they won't acknowledge you, or they don't answer your emails, or, how are we supposed to collaborate? How are we supposed to work together? So on either side, you can see what we might think of as bad behavior in the workplace, as unacceptable behavior. Even it can escalate to that. The pursuer is often the person who's more recognized as, frustrated, angry, or harder to deal with. The withdrawer may kind of just disappear a little bit more. Okay. Um, Both can be understood as having the positive intention of trying to save the relationship. One is trying to save it by getting away from the conflict and avoiding the conflict. The other is trying to save it by trying to have that conversation. Let's deal with this. Let's tackle it head on. Okay. And of course, each is re-triggering the other. So these are some of the things that you might typically hear from a pursuer like that. There's memes about, we need to talk. Um, sometimes even hearing that is enough to push somebody else out of the room. So, like if in an argument at home, if you're a pursuer, it'd be like a red flag to a bull when the withdrawer just leaves the room. They walk out in the middle of an argument. The withdrawer is doing that to try and close down the argument. The pursuer is just going into full-blown panic mode at that stage. How can you possibly walk out, you know, on this? It feels like you're walking out on the relationship. Um, so things that the withdrawer might say might be, it's impossible to please you. Nothing I do is ever good enough for you, or there's always the one thing, isn't there? Or I don't have time to deal with this issue anymore. They're trying to shut it down. There's no point in discussing this, or I'm busy right now, and we'll discuss this again another time, which never happens. Um, and again, underlying all of this is that separation distress, that panic that's happening inside. And I really want to emphasize that we're not always aware that we're feeling panic, or that it's about like a separation distress. We're not aware of that at all. We, as human beings, grossly underestimate the impacts that we have on other people and that they have on us. So very often people are coming to me to tell me about a conflict or a disconnect that they're experiencing in the workplace. And they will use words like, but this person isn't really important to me. They don't really matter. I don't really care. And it's like, okay, but you still come to me and you're losing sleep and you're stressed about this. So that kind of indicates to me this is important to you. This person is important to you. And so, because it's a workplace relationship, we don't recognize that this person is important. We don't recognize that this is actually an attachment bond. We need to be able to securely bond and connect with the people that we work most closely with, and particularly the person that we report to. And for the manager or for the leaders, you need to be able to create that safe bonding experience for your team. Um, and when that's in place, it's like a solid ground from which your team can then grow and perform. But if that's not there, if there's shakiness, there's going to be issues in productivity. You may be issuing pips. There's going to be other kind of things going on and people hitting off each other the wrong way often. So this image just helps you to break down the negative cycle, and this is part of the process that we do in the EMC reconnection process. And so you can see that, like, say, for example, you might have person A on the left, person B on the right. And if I'm person A, maybe something triggered me. It might be that I went in to ask a question of my manager, and they gave me a certain look when I walked in the door. Their tone was brusque, and that triggered me into kind of immediate kind of feeling like, am I being dismissed here? Am I being judged? What are they thinking of me? That hits off my raw spots. So we all have raw spots. If you think of raw spots like on the skin almost, that come from our history, our life story, really, of all the experiences that we've ever had that make us more tender and touchy even around certain things or the certain things that people do or how people impact us. And so those raw spots are hit off and we have a reaction and we might hurt or feel stung. And that creates our surface emotions. So the surface emotions are the emotions that we see on the surface. They're the ones that we can recognize in others. The most familiar ones would be, frustration, anger, irritation, annoyance, maybe kind of even a frozen numbness. So those emotions are happening. Of course, we know that those emotions can then be triggering the other person. Alongside those emotions, thoughts are happening in our heads. They're automatic. They come in, flash of a pan, and depending on whether we're more naturally a pursuer or a withdrawer, our automatic thoughts might be like, I have to get away. That's more a withdrawer automatic thought. Or, how dare you? Who do you think you are? Would be more maybe a pursuer, you know, um, automatic thought. And this all shapes our behavior, our emotions, our thoughts, all that triggering reaction that we're having inside is then pushing us into a certain type of behavior. And of course, we tend to have behavior patterns that we repeat in similar circumstances with different people in different contexts. So I think it can be really helpful to see these as protective behaviors. That helps us to reframe and feel differently about what we might otherwise think of as inappropriate or challenging or just poor behavior in the workplace. These are protective behaviors because we're feeling unsafe. And we get caught up in these negative cycles because we simply do not have the tools. Until now, we haven't had the tools. We're not brought up with, emotional coaching. We're not people come to me all the time because we don't have these skills, because we want to be a good leader, a positive leader. We want to be a good example. We want to care for our people, and we just don't know what to do when these kind of things happen. And then we're getting triggered, even if we're not immediately part of it. So these cycles ensue, and one person is triggering the other and re-triggering, and it goes around in that cycle, and that can just get stuck deeper and deeper into a rut. So if we look at those protective behaviors, this example, we have a case study of Tom and Brandon, where Tom was the CEO, and Tom, when he would experience Brandon giving out or getting louder and more aggressive in a meeting, Tom would begin to shut down and feel helpless. He felt ashamed. He didn't know, how to deal with Brandon's kind of aggressive outbursts. The more Brandon experienced Tom as kind of shutting down and closing down, the more angry and frustrated he was getting. It's like, you're my boss, you're my CEO, why don't you care? Why aren't you responding? Why aren't you asking me what's wrong? Why don't you want to fix this? And the more fierce he got in his pursuit, of course, the more Tom ran away. So Tom's protective behaviors then are distancing and withdrawing, whereas Brandon's protective behaviors were the blaming and judgment and criticizing, and then he would numb out. And all of this impacted on his tone of voice and the speed of his speech. Okay, so they're the kind of protective behaviors, just to give you an idea. So typically we see what I've described earlier, the pursuer and the withdrawer. That's the pursue-withdraw cycle. But it can also happen that you get two pursuers, and very often that just escalates and it can be explosive. And there's often a lot of blaming and finger pointing there, where it's your fault, your fault. It's like find the bad guy, we call it. Okay. The good news is that when you've got two pursuers, they both want to be at the table. So it's probably the easiest negative cycle to break out of, because you get both at the table. The most difficult one is where you have two withdrawers, and so they're just not speaking. They're more difficult to get to the table to resolve the issue. They're out of here, don't want to see them, don't want to talk to them, don't want to know about it. They're both really freezing and fleeing. Okay. So the root cause of conflict and of poor behavior in the workplace is the erosion of connection. And what I'm seeing in, our modern workplaces with hybrid work and remote work, and it can be 100% in office either, but sometimes the connections are never built to begin with. People might be onboarding online, working online, never really meeting somebody in real life, or maybe never having the opportunity to have one-on-ones with the people who really matter. And so, that solid grounding, that safety isn't there from the start. It's really, really important to spend time and prioritize that with new recruits. When you're training people, build a relationship. It's not just about building knowledge, build a relationship and they will grow. So we're social creatures. We require that connection to survive and thrive. And neuroscience has shown that when our brain goes into that panic mode, when our amygdala is firing off and that separation distress is happening, those kind of behaviors of the complaining, the blaming, the criticizing, the demanding, this is wrong, that's wrong, when are you going to fix this? And or that just total disengagement and presenteeism and distancing or stonewalling and not speaking. That all of that just increases more stress and anxiety and everybody who's involved. And as those behaviors continue to persist and the distance between the people continues to widen, the intensity to pursue or preserve the connection increases as well, which then leads to behaviors that become more aggressive, more demanding, and more threatening even. So then you see either full-blown conflict and very often at this stage, you're going into reports being made and processes and procedures and HR involved and, employment law and all the rest of it. And people are often being managed out. And again, if I was paid for every time somebody says to me, well, there's just this one person, and if I could just get rid of them, then we'd have a great team. That's finger pointing and scapegoating. It's like if we change the framework, change the lens that we're looking at that, instead of I must manage out everybody who becomes a problem, how about recognizing that it's not them and it's not me, it's something that's happening in the space between us. There's a negative cycle happening in this relationship. There's a disconnect, and that's what we need to look at. And even that change of language and change of lens, really, and how you're looking at it, that creates more safety because there's no longer a sense of blame or judgment about that person. And that's challenging because very often, we come and we're fired up and we're triggered, and a lot of our raw spots been, hit off, and so we might be feeling hurt or annoyed and caught up in all these surface emotions ourselves. So we want to blame, we want to accuse, we want to demand, and we want them to change, and yet the change begins with ourselves. And so again, it's taking away any blame. There's no bad guys here. There's something happening in the space between you. Let's look at this. This is a negative cycle, and this is typical. It happens all the time. And just to again reiterate that this is not just about big conflict. Like disconnections and those negative cycles are happening all the time. Think of the person that you love and maybe live with, love the most in the world, and perhaps spend your life with and have chosen to spend your life with. You still have disconnections regularly with that person. There are times when everything irritates you about them because they're experiencing a disconnect. How come they can't fill the dishwasher right? How hard is it to hang the clothes up, or whatever it might be? Those kind of things drive you mad about that person because you're disconnected from them at that moment. Okay. Other times that doesn't annoy you at all. Nothing annoys you about that person. You love them and see all their good stuff. They're the same person, so are you. It's just that when you're feeling connected, those kind of things just aren't so much of an issue, and you can deal with them. And it's the same in the workplace. When we're feeling connected, we can deal with things a lot better. We can get the work done. We can problem solve together. We can innovate together. So it's about recognizing that when little disconnections happen and having the skills to address those disconnections, preferably early, rather than letting them escalate to a point where you've got full-blown conflict happening. So as I mentioned, this is backed by neuroscience. And just one example of some research by Naomi Eisenberger in the University of California. And you can see on the left here, she has shown that rejection triggers the same circuits and in the same part of the brain as physical pain. So on the left brain, you can see the area lighting up where somebody has been rejected, and so that's social pain regulation. And on the right side, there's the physical pain regulation. So and this goes right back again, thousands of years ago, or however long ago it was, when we were tribal people. If you were rejected or excluded from your tribe, then that meant certain death. So it is so threatening for us, and that's still imprinted in our brain. It's so threatening for us to feel that sense of rejection or abandonment or being dismissed, and that's why it sets off the panic process. It doesn't necessarily make logical, rational sense to us in our modern lives with people all around us. And it's like, well, I don't need them anyway. It's like, well, actually, you're still having that reaction. Okay. Particularly if it's your boss that we're talking about or a close colleague. And so it's painful for us. It's actually firing off the same part of the brain as if we just stepped on a nail and physically hurt ourselves. Okay. So, what do we need to do when you recognize that well, first of all, it's about having awareness and recognizing that there is a negative cycle, that there's a disconnect happening. So, where you're seeing bad behavior, that's your clue. There's a disconnect in a relationship. Where you're seeing, disengagement, there's a disconnect in a key relationship. Where you're seeing, absenteeism, there's probably, numerous disconnects happening for that person. And so, first of all, it's like identifying, okay, having that awareness rather than kind of jumping into that reactivity mode where we're getting triggered and then we're re-triggering the other person, slowing things down. Emotions happen very fast and they seem to come all together. And so it can be very hard for us to kind of decipher what I'm feeling, which emotions are happening where. We have to slow things down in order to kind of grow our awareness, learn, and choose how we want to respond rather than going into react mode. So when we can slow down and catch it that, we must be in a negative cycle. Okay. Or I notice I'm getting triggered here. We must be just getting caught in a negative cycle. And to be able to say that and use that language, even with a colleague, or, if you, like, say, for that example I used earlier, where I walk into my boss and they have this look on their face and I feel dismissed. If I can name that and go, I, I notice that I'm getting triggered, feels like I'm maybe not wanted here right now. Is this a bad time? And then they can reassure me, oh, sorry, no, I just got off a difficult call. And that it was about something else entirely. It could be that simple. But miscommunications and the fact that we don't have these skills means that what's much more likely to happen is that I leave, I'm annoyed or put out and hurt by my boss's actions or reactions. They could be clueless. They might not have an idea in the world that they've had that impact on me. And I'm probably going off now to talk to another colleague about, how rude or dismissive they were and how they don't care. So if you're a leader listening to this today, what can you take from this? There's times that you're going to set off and trigger somebody else inadvertently without necessarily even knowing about it because we're human. Okay. Again, slowing down, identifying rather than then you getting triggered because this person walked off in a huff or, it didn't, you know, respond well the next time you saw them or whatever. It's like, okay, something's going on here. Can we slow down and identify what's happening for you, what's happening for me, and validate the other person's emotional experience. And again, we like in EMC to give people these tools to deal with the emotions that crop up in the workplace. There's a myth that emotions don't belong in the workplace, but actually they're happening all the time, as we can see by the amount of conflict that's going on. But good emotions happen, positive emotions happen too. That we need positive emotions such as engagement, motivation, interest. So gratitude, appreciation, they're all positive. So instead of just listening to the person's story, you could disagree with what somebody is saying. You might not like their behavior or how they dealt with something, but you can still validate their emotional experience. Phrases such as, that must be so stressful. That sounds really stressful for you. Or I can hear how this was really difficult for you. Okay, so you're acknowledging and validating their emotional experience without necessarily saying that what they did was right or anything like that. Okay. And so we encourage and train our leaders to be accessible, responsive, and engaged. Essentially, the A or E there is, are you there for me? That's the essential attachment question. A direct report needs to know that of their colleagues and of their boss. Are you there for me? Do you care? Do I matter? Am I important here? Okay, we all need to feel like we're cared for and that we're important, that we matter. And when we feel that way, we feel safe and secure enough we can go and do our work. Okay, so accessible, responsive, and engaged. That's a way to continuously practice to create safety and create that emotional connection. And then we can reconnect and engage by listening, by acknowledging the difficult emotions and in a very safe way. Okay. And of course, we have a whole process for this that's very structured, and that structure creates safety. So you're not just asking somebody, how do you feel, and picking some fluffy emotion out of the air, which might not be safe in the workplace. So in EMC, emotions are seen as the music of connection, and sometimes we need to change the music. So really, we're about helping you, giving you the skills to address the fear of disconnection with emotional responsiveness. And leaders can scaffold positive interactions and emotions to foster connection. So let's just hear from Elena's experience after she experienced EMC with this person that she had been experiencing disconnect.
We were able to make significant progress and have breakthroughs for both of us on how we react, what we need from the other person to feel supported so that you can do your best work, both her and me. I was calmer for sure. I felt more grounded, more secure, I'd say. It's better, happier, honestly. She was definitely much more at ease, much more confident, and I think knowing and realizing by doing the process and talking through what she needed from me, I think I was able to give her the support or the confidence that she needed to actually take the jump and keep growing. It was just easier. There was no more whining, much more straightforward communication, very open. Sometimes we just say like, look, I'm not okay. Okay, I'm fine. That's okay. Let's, what's happening. Let's talk about it and let's move forward. Very different. And then within the next 3 months, she was promoted to manager. And now it's a year and a half later, and she's actually holding my position. She's director of the technical support team. So she's doing amazing. I'm much closer to her. Also, for me, just to go through the process and then just realize in other interactions with other people. I saw it also with my own boss that he went through the process, right? And it made a huge difference before and after.
So that's Elena's experience, and actually, I've met the person who is now the director as well, and this is years later, and they still, um, want EMC. They'd love to see it, their whole company globally using this approach because it's made such a difference and is still making difference to them years later. And that's why Elena's happy and the other lady is happy for the videos to be used about this. So it's really, I often think it's like giving people a language. We all experience emotions and we all experience disconnections, and most of the time we don't have the skills or the language to understand what's happening in ourselves or in the other person and how to make it right again. And so we either pursue and end up inadvertently, even though we think we're reaching for connection, very often we're pushing away. Okay. Or we withdraw, and so somebody's trying to reach and you're gone. So we get stuck in those negative cycles and patterns. And so this is like learning a language. It's going to feel a little bit uncomfortable at the start. It's like if you never learned French and now you have to practice speaking in a French accent, you're going to feel like weird and uncomfortable a little bit at the beginning. It takes practice, but it's a language that everybody can learn, and it benefits you not just in the workplace, but in every relationship, everywhere, whether with your children or your partner at home or friendships, because relationships matter. And we know that there's so much science to tell us that relationships matter. And yet we haven't been paying attention to that, I think, too much in the workplace. So the goal of the EMC process is to provide that common language, so that you have that, yeah, we're speaking the same language. We're singing off the same hymn sheet here. I know what to do and you know what to do. So let's go do it and address if there's an issue, and we have the skills to do that and we have the process to do that. And then we can get on with our work. And it just takes a lot of the messiness out of it and the skirting around things and the minefields then. Um, because we have that common language. So it equips teams with a roadmap to relationships and teaches the steps to repair the connection. So where disconnects happen, as they inevitably will, because we're human and we get triggered and we all have our little raw spots, it's like, okay, well, knowing that that's going to happen, well, now we just do this and we have the steps to repair this. And that part of the reconnection process is facilitating and empowering bonding conversations. So very often you end up closer than maybe you were even before. So you get to restore and create a culture of emotional safety, and that increases security in the team and that allows them to thrive. And so we know, like Google did a massive survey years ago on high performing teams. And what they found was that the single factor that was common across all the high performing teams was not intelligence or IQ, it wasn't technical expertise or, the particular mix of the team even. It was the psychological safety, essentially. So the emotional safety that they felt in the team was so important that that's what allowed them to perform more highly than other teams. And so EMC is really a roadmap to creating that psychological safety. It's also a roadmap to building emotional intelligence. So I've been working with leaders and with emotional intelligence for years using the assessment tools, and there are brilliant assessment tools out there. But once you know where you are, it's like, well, then how do you help somebody or support somebody to build their emotional intelligence? There hasn't been like a process or a pathway to do that until now. And again, this process is building emotional self-awareness, it's building our social awareness, it's building our emotional self-regulation, our ability to regulate others, it's that interpersonal relationship skills. These skills that you learn in this process can be used in one-to-ones, in meetings, in boards meetings, in across the board. Really, you've got these better people skills. So even if you're somebody who considers yourself to be quite emotionally intelligent or to have good people skills, this gives you a structure it's quite foolproof. So obviously, the benefits are reducing workplace conflict and increasing productivity and performance, creating that psychologically safe environment, and that has big impact on team effectiveness. And it's also, you're here today because perhaps you're experiencing difficult behavior in the workplace or challenging behavior. And so this gives you the skills and the tools to address the anger, the stonewalling, the passive aggressive behavior, the lack of trust, and all of that, and to understand it from a different perspective, that even when we see things differently, we approach things differently. So by understanding these and seeing these as protective behaviors, that person is feeling a little bit like, the lion with the thorn in his paw is going to roar and scare everybody away. And when you need that brave little mouse to come and take the thorn out, and the lion just turns into a pussycat. So a big softie. So we can scare people away with our bad behavior, with our roaring, but often we're actually vulnerable. We're feeling vulnerable, and we don't know how to address that in a safe way. So this gives you the tools to repair relationships and increase emotional connection, and to build agile teams and develop that better culture and atmosphere. So to learn more about EMC, you could read, Dr. Lola Gershfeld actually has at least 3 books published now, one quite recently. The emotional connection one that you can see here is probably the core textbook. It's not a big book. That's the one that I'd recommend that you start with. You can learn so much on the American website, emcleaders.com. There are lots of resources there. There's white papers, there's case studies. So if you have an interest, that's a great place to start. And as I mentioned at the start, I'm the person bringing EMC beyond America to Europe and beyond. So I'm the person to contact if you're this side of the water. Get in touch. You can get in touch with me through LinkedIn if you're connected with me in LinkedIn. Or you can get in touch with me through email. And just in case depending on the timing when you're watching this, I do run live EMC trainings for the public as well as for companies. So usually this is about going into companies and working with your team of senior leadership, or a team or a team of managers and leaders, and um, and running the masterclass certification with your leaders or managers. But I also offer, because I've had interest from coaches, psychologists, therapists, and other individuals who were coming on their own to learn this. And so I run public trainings. There's one happening this October 2025 on the 2nd and 3rd in Portlaoise, Ireland, in person. So if you're interested in running this for your company or your organization, just get in touch and we'll just have a conversation and see how we can work this out. It doesn't matter if you're not Ireland based. I will travel. I'm available to travel, but it would be English speaking training. And ideally, we would have 3 days in person. That can be really difficult to get a group of leaders for 3 days. So we spend at least 2 days in person together, and the follow-up can be done online. So when I'm doing the public trainings, I do 2 full days in person with a follow-up half day online about a month later. If you're in the Republic of Ireland and you are a company in the private sector, or you're employed in the private sector or self-employed, SkillNet funding of up to 35% may be available, again, depending on whether they have any funding left. But if you're eligible, it's certainly worth asking the question, and I will find out if you can avail of that too. So that makes huge reductions, and companies can also avail of that. So this masterclass certification is recognised by the International Coaching Federation, the ICF, as well as in Ireland here, the Psychological Society of Ireland. In the US, it's recognised by a large number of HR and L&D bodies as well. So it's a professional certification course. So if you're not already connected with me on LinkedIn, please do. You can just you get your phone out now to use the QR code there. And if you're not already subscribed to my monthly newsletter, there's a QR code there to do that too. So if I promise not to bombard you, it literally is just a newsletter once a month, approximately. I let you know about other upcoming webinars that I'm running or free resources. It's a way of keeping in touch, and learning as you go. So please do connect, subscribe as you're listening and watching me on YouTube right now. I would love if you enjoyed this to give me a like and to subscribe to my channel. So thank you so much, and do get in touch if you have any questions after today or would like to discuss things for your organization. Thank you.